This part of our service we call our minds and hearts together, feast on the Word of God. And as we do that, you've already had indication from the Bible reading this morning that Will gave earlier in the service, and also as you're going to see on the screen, that our text, the place in the scripture that we're going to have our gospel preaching is 2 John. So the best thing you can do to benefit from this part of our service is not only listen carefully, but have your Bible open in front of you that we can feast together, look together, read together what the scriptures teach us in this passage. To begin, we're going to read again, take a little closer look at the first two verses. The elder unto the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth, and not I only, but also all they that know the truth, for the truth's sake, which abideth in us, and it shall be with us forever. Inquiring minds have some questions about these verses. We'll try to answer briefly just a couple of the most common. But what we want to do first is to underline a part of the beginning, and it's verse 2, that actually becomes the theme of not only the beginning, but also the entire epistle. So if you think of 2 John in your New Testament, and you want to be a good student of the Bible, you want to be able to apply the scriptures to a relevant application to your life every day, then this is a way to think of 1 John. What he said he was writing was for the truth's sake. You know, that's an interesting expression when you think about it, because we have several expressions where we say for something's sake. I think one of the most common that I think about when I try to recall hearing this, I've heard probably a lot of people in my life through the years say, for heaven's sake. Maybe you've heard that also. Well, that's an expression. We say that without thinking, just as an automatic expression of thought, what it means. But let's take opportunity here in this lesson this morning to try to explain what John means by that expression, helps us see clearly exactly what he means. That expression means for the good, for the advantage, and for the enhancement of the truth. Now, there's a lot of things we do for the good of a lot of things. But this particular application has to do with what we can do for the truth. And we need to see our lives, our faith, our activities, everything that we do as Christians in some form, in some manner, for the truth's sake. The beginning of this, is identified as one of the three epistles of John. The way that we know that is because of the way he identified himself. The elder. Now, that's not an official title. He's not identifying himself as an elder of the church. That is a term of age. Older. Chronology in years. So John is identifying himself as being older, being aged at this time, and we know from what we can understand about the writing of the 5 books in the New Testament that John wrote. He's on the island of Patmos. He's older in years. It's about 95 AD. And perhaps he is in that age range as near as we can tell, but he's old. And he is in exile. And he's thinking of someone. And he's thinking of an elect lady. And that raises the question, exactly to whom is this part of the New Testament written? Well, let's look at that for just a moment, because a lot of folks have a question about this. Who exactly is the elect lady? Well, there are 2 schools of thought. and that's where it must end. We can't narrow that down to one, because we can't know for certain by faith which is correct. But on the one hand, we have the school of thought that John is using this figuratively. And therefore the term figuratively is referring to a church somewhere. On the other hand, he's using it literally, which would identify this woman as an elect, faithful Christian. Now, when we as students of the Bible, you read translations, you read good Bible scholars, and there is no certain answer to exactly what. But as students, we have leanings. That's the way I relate to you, where I am. I'm a sinner, but I lean toward one. The more I study, I lean toward one. And the one that I believe is more correct, and I'll simply suggest to you, because it does make a difference in understanding to whom this letter is written. So let me suggest that the evidence for identifying this lady is in favor of a literal interpretation, a Christian woman known to the Apostle John. In other words, not figuratively to a church, but literally to a Christian woman. The Greek word kurios, which is the original Greek New Testament word for lady, is translated also as a proper name. It's a proper name just like yours, except for some in the first century. And so this is possibly John's intent. So you know what that means? If we lean in this direction toward the literal Christian woman, we've got two possibilities. Is it just someone in general, or is it someone who is named Syria? And I have in parentheses to explain to you what your Bible means when perhaps your Bible footnotes. It will have a footnote. Syria as a proper name. As the translators suggest, it's possible. We don't know for sure, but it's possible that John is writing this letter to a Christian woman who is actually named Syria, and to her children as well. This literal interpretation, I believe, is best because it harmonizes with verse 5, where it occurs again. In verse 10, where it is said she has a house, and we'll talk about that more in detail in just a moment. And then in verse 13, she has a sister with children. Now I realize that all of that, as a lot of folks think, can still be symbolic or figurative. But this Bible student, this gospel preacher, leans, if I have a leaning, in the direction of the literal interpretation. So I think of John writing at this stage in his life, getting close to the end, has been taken into exile by the Roman Empire, put on the Isle of Patmos in seclusion. He's writing 5 books by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit that will be in the canon of the New Testament. And one of them, this one, is to a Christian woman and to her offspring. So, looking at this, let's think of 2 John and everything that John writes, everything that he says, as being for the truth's sake. And when we look at the body of the letter, what does John say that you and I can take home, that we can actually learn and use every day? What are some things that John said in the first century that still applies to Christians today? That everyone who wants to serve Christ faithfully should learn, understand, and make application to. What are those things? Well, this is where I hope in the next few minutes we can truly benefit you and your Christian life. As you see on the chart, I would identify verses 5 and 6 as his exhortation to this elect lady. We'll refer to her that way because I know that's true. Well, that's what the text says. She is an elect lady. And what John writes to her, he first sounds an exhortation. Let's see what that is. In verse 5, now I beseech thee, lady, Not as though I wrote to thee a new commandment, but that which we had from the beginning, that we love one another. So it's interesting that here by the end of the first century, you look back over the previous decades of New Testament history, starting with the establishment of the church in 33 AD, the destruction of Jerusalem in 70, and now John, toward the end of the first century, his life just about ended, is writing, and he's exhorting this elect, faithful Christian woman. And he said, it's not like I'm writing you a new commandment, because we've had this commandment as Christians from the very beginning. The origin of this commandment is the Lord. And we read in the ministry of Christ in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, especially in John 13, that this commandment is the way that he intended for his disciples to be identified by their love for one another. So John brings this commandment to our attention, and he said, this is love, that we should walk after his commandments. This is the commandment, even ye heard from the beginning, that ye should walk in it. So this is very basic, very simple, straightforward admonition, and it still rings true today. The Lord still wants his church, wherever that church may be. He still wants every Christian, every disciple of Christ to be admonished, to be exhorted to walk in this commandment. And that is John's exhortation. That's his admonition, to walk in the commandment, to love one another. And admittedly, we do need to be reminded of that once in a while, don't we? Because sometimes it's easy to slip back, sometimes it's easy to forget, sometimes we let down, and we're not always at our best in loving one another. But where John puts this, it puts it in the central core of importance for her, this elect lady, and for the church at whatever part of the century it may be. The second part begins with the next verse, verse 7. And through verse 11, that almost completes the epistle. So you see the rest of the body, the core, the important part of what John is wanting to say. He's warning her. The elect lady is being warned. You think, is that necessary? Apparently. Is it important? It surely must be. And so if it's important for her, important for John to write this, it's important for us because it's a part of our New Testament today. So let's see what John said to warn her. In verse 7, he said, for many deceivers are gone forth into the world, even they that confess not that Jesus Christ cometh in the flesh. This is the deceiver and the Antichrist. So you see the word for signals something to every Bible reader, whether you're trying to study or just read. The word for suggests that he's giving an explanation for something he's just said. Okay? So what John said in verse 7 is the reason why it is so important for this elect lady, for you and for me, to obey the commandment of the Lord, to love each other as much as we possibly can. Because of what? The reason that he's given. There's ever-present threat from false teachers. Sometimes we don't place that element of danger on them that the New Testament is. We think of false teachers, so what? And they're out there, and maybe we're kind of soft in our attitude toward them or soft in our evaluation of them in light of what the Bible teaches. But one thing this passage does is to give us a more strict evaluation and understanding of false teachers. And the reason that Christians are to be bound together cemented together in love, in this case, this congregation, is because many deceivers are gone into the world. Now, who are these deceivers that John is talking about here that was an imminent danger for this elect lady? Well, they were teaching that Christ did not come in the flesh. Now, can you imagine these teachers going around teaching? And you know what that means? Let's put that in other words. There was no incarnation. There was no Jesus on the earth. He did not come in the flesh, and therefore he did not exist. There were men who were actually going around teaching that. Let me tell you that there were two groups that we know of that were doing this. One of them were the Jews, and this came up, Rick, in your class this morning. How even yet today, and I think Carl made some comments on this in class, how even yet today these Orthodox Jews and others still say, he didn't come in the flesh. He wasn't here. We're still waiting on him. And the Jews were still waiting by the end of the first century. We're still waiting on the Messiah. We're still looking for the Messiah. And that is still true today. I'll tell you an experience I had this year that this indelibly imprinted on my mind. In my opportunity to be at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, we had to wait until the Jews cleared the wall. The men and the women were segregated. They were at the wall praying. We all have seen pictures. But some of us had seen one of the Jews put a note in one of the crevices. He had written something out, and when he left, he put that note in the wall. And those stones were beveled, which is a direct indication these are the stones that were put in place by Herod the Great. This was the actual foundation of the building upon which the New Testament temple was built. And they look upon this as a holy place. And he put his note. We were so curious, so determined to know what that said. We got it out. We had to have it interpreted. But it was a prayer. Please send the Messiah. This Jew was at the Wailing Wall in this time, praying for God to still send Jesus, or what they conceived to be the Messiah. Still looking, and that is validated in people all over the world. And then the second group, not only the Jews, but the Gnostics. The Gnostics were a group of people in the first century that grew with strength toward the end of the first century, and they were based upon a philosophical view that was from Greek philosophy. But what they would have said, he couldn't have. It's impossible. It didn't happen because he couldn't come in the flesh. So there was these two schools of thought. So we don't know any more about the specific identity, but we do know that there were some people going around teaching that Jesus did not come in the flesh. What is our position on that? We know beyond a shadow of a doubt, we know with the strongest faith that we can muster. We believe in Jesus Christ, that he was here upon the face of the earth. The evidence is overwhelming and undeniable. But those who went forth teaching this are called the deceiver and the Antichrist. Deceiver is pretty bad, because that's a person who goes around trying to deceive people into believing something that's not true. And that's the way God identified them. They were deceivers because they were teaching what was not true, trying to get people to believe what was not true. That's bad. There are still a lot of those today. But these are also called the Antichrists. And there we get into something that is a whole new element, especially in our day. So I have a brief explanation. Because sometimes we have questions. Exactly what is the Antichrist? Well, let me tell you. The Antichrist comes from the word in the original New Testament language, Antichristos, which just simply means against or opposed to Christ. That's the literal definition. That's all that word means. What is or who is opposed to Christ? Against Christ. Okay? Here's our important question. How is this word used in the Bible? Not in the religious world today, but how is it used in the Word of God? It only occurs in 1st and 2nd John. And it only occurs 4 times. And here are the verses. If you're interested to read, if you ever have an encounter with this concept, or you have questions about it yourself, read these passages, because this is where the term occurs in the Scriptures. And you see the last one, 2 John 7, is our text. But I have 1 John 4, verse 3. Let's read what it says, because I think it is significant, as well as the others, but this more so. John said in 1 John chapter 4, verse 3, after giving the commandment to try the spirits, because there are some who are false prophets who are gone into the world. And then he said, every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. And this is the spirit of the Antichrist, of which you have heard that it is coming, and now it is already in the world. Now that tells us a great deal. It tells us how the New Testament characterizes the Antichrist. Again, it's consistent with what John says in our text in 2 John verse 7. If someone says, doesn't confess, as this verse says, Jesus, that person is not from God. They're not taught of God. Their source and origin of their teaching is something else. But this is the Antichrist. So, what we learn from this passage, let's just summarize this. Already existed in the 1st century. John said in the very last statement in this verse, now it is already here. That was in the 1st century. It is already here. We are already seeing it, the spirit, the attitude, the teaching. And so it identifies false teachers, deceivers. And you might want to do what I did in my AI assistant. You have one of those too. The artificial intelligence thing. Get on there and ask the question, what is the Antichrist? You will be overwhelmed by all sorts of information, and you will not believe how much is said that's not taught in the Bible. The main concept of the Antichrist today is it's future. It's not here yet, but it's coming. And what we will see as it gets close to the time of the second coming of Christ, the Antichrist will appear. And it will be a giant, heroic evil that will dominate. That's the Antichrist. Yet in the future, marking the end, the eschatology of the world. That's the going concept out there in religion. But let me exhort us, as John did the elect lady. Let's stay with Scripture. Let's read the Bible. Let's believe what the Bible says and understand the clarity of truth. So, warning number 1. False teachers are a huge danger. I wanted to put that in as few words as possible. I feel like that's an understatement for what this is saying, but we can take that as a warning. Folks, the reason that church needs to be submitted together in love, and we need to have a bond of affection for one another, is because we need to stay together, believe together, worship together, and move into the future together and journey toward heaven together, because false teachers are a huge, huge danger. They're deceivers. They're the Antichrist in the sense that they have the same spirit of false teaching today. Number 2, John said, look to yourselves that you lose not the things which you have wrought, but that you receive a full reward. Now just think what that verse is saying. Elect lady and your children, your offspring, I'm writing to you. I want you, as well as all who read this epistle, to look to yourselves. Now what that says is very important for all of us. He is admonishing and warning. This is a warning and admonition about losing what they had accomplished. You can lose it, elect lady, and your children. You all can lose what you have worked for, what you have gained. You can lose it. Now, this directly contradicts those in the religious world today who say you can't. There's nothing you can do to sin, to be lost once you're a Christian, because once saved, always saved. We could keep going on that, but most of us are familiar with that doctrine. It's not true. It's not taught in the Bible. And look at what John is warning her. Elect lady, you need to look at yourself. And to do so meant to give a close, this language, a close personal look. We would call it, the word that I have used on this chart, an inspection, but it's an introspection. Look carefully. Look closely. And that's important to you. Let's not take too lightly to think that, well, I've got it made. I'm going to heaven. There's nothing. And we sometimes become too lax in our thinking. Even though we believe we can sin so as to be lost and lose our salvation, as taught in so many passages, John is teaching her, elect lady, you've got to carry on, and you and your children have to carry on a very close personal look at yourself. Because it will help you keep from losing what you've gained. And here we're simply identifying what John said that was. If they would lose what they had worked for, just read the verse again, they would lose their reward. Now, none of us, including you, and may want to lose our reward, do we? I mean, it is simply not true. None of us want to lose our reward, because the alternative is so unthinkable, so undesirable. When we fully understand and know exactly what it is and believe beyond a shadow of a doubt what the Bible teaches, we don't want to lose our reward. And so what John said, I'm warning you, what you need to do to avoid that is to take the opportunity for some close self-examination. Okay? Warning number 3. This is probably one of the most familiar verses, perhaps, in John's writing, maybe in the New Testament, I don't know. But I know it's very frequently quoted from 2 John, because of what it teaches is important. Whosoever goeth onward and abideth not in the teaching of Christ hath not God. He that abideth in the teaching, the same hath both the Father and the Son. I suggest to people who memorize this verse only and lift it out of 2 John, that's good. I mean, if you got this verse memorized, that's good. But don't remove it from its setting. Don't remove it from its context in your understanding. See it in the flow of thought in this inspired epistle. Elect lady, I'm teaching you, admonishing you to obey the commandment to love one another, because many false teachers have gone into the world, and you need to look closely at yourself to see where you are on this. Why? What is the reason? Because whosoever goeth onward, that is, continues on their way, and does not abide in the teaching of Christ, never minimize the consequence of doing that. The loss from embracing false teachers, or any false doctrine, whether those specifically mentioned or not, is the loss of God himself. Most of the time, this thought is not put in that setting. But that's what John is saying. Let's accept it. That's what the Bible says. Whosoever goeth onward and does not abide in the teaching of Christ hath not God. He doesn't have God. That means there's been a break in the fellowship. He has lost God himself. And so we understand the teaching of Christ is the teaching from Christ. I think, well, your translation this morning said the doctrine of Christ, I think, and that's what it's referring to, though those different terms all mean the same thing. We understand this to be the gospel of Christ. We understand it to be the New Testament. So to have the Son and to have the Father, we must abide in the teaching of Christ, the New Testament, and not succumb to religious modernism. Now, if we talked about that as much as it should be talked about sometime, in the first century, we've already talked about that a little bit, of what that meant for Christians then, what that would mean for this elect lady and her children. But you know what it means for you today? To succumb to religious modernism? You folks are outdated. You folks are old-fashioned. You're still trying to teach what the Bible teaches. Let's move on. Let's update. Let's modernize and have teaching that's more relevant to the 21st century. And so let's change the Bible where we can, change the instructions that God has given to make them more adaptable and acceptable in modern times. Progressive religious modernism. And therefore, to try to stay with the teaching of Christ, to try to take your New Testament and read and learn and follow it, is absolute foolishness according to modern religious progressivism. But now, what does the Bible say? This is where it comes down to where you must take a stand. And that stand is, okay, I reject the New Testament. Don't want it. Well, accept the consequences of that. And the consequences are not pretty. The other choice is accept it. And as John teaches in this passage, to live by it, to walk in it, to have it as your guide all the way to heaven. And then if you do that, you have both the Father and the Son. That's what you want, right? Instead of the devil, that's the alternative. You want the Father and the Son. You have them both together, one or the other. So let's express this third warning. What you've got to do, and I warn you, John is saying to her, avoid breaking fellowship with God. You don't want to do that. You don't want to be separate from God so that God is no longer claiming you as one of his. Okay. We have one more. And it perhaps is the one that needs the most explanation. If anyone comes unto you and brings not this teaching, receive him not into your house, and give him no greeting, for he that gives him greeting partakes of his evil works. Obviously, we can talk long on those two verses, but I think I have it expressed concisely enough that we can understand it in a short amount of time. people raise, does this verse mean that I can't have sinners in my house? Does this verse mean if a couple of Jehovah's Witnesses come to my door, I can't say, come in, let's sit down and study the Bible together? That's not what John means. So let's try to explain what John, remember he's talking to the elect lady and her house, where she lives. The hospitality and greeting forbidden by John in this passage is the kind that is the reception and fellowship of those false teachers. If a false teacher comes to your door and you say, well, good to see you, I embrace you, I invite you in receptively, acceptably. And so the greeting referred to is chairo, which means Godspeed. So if you wish someone's Godspeed, you're saying, God be with you, I'm behind you, I'm asking God to support you and go with you for success. You don't want to do that to a false teacher. You do not want to do that to someone who is not teaching the truth. Why? Because of the explicit nature of this passage. If anyone comes to your house, receive him not into your house. I mean, what that means is don't show him hospitality. And furthermore, don't express a greeting that's going to show him you're embracing him for whatever he is and whatever he says. It's a false doctrine. And so John is forbidding any kind of verbiage, any kind of hospitality that shows agreement, embracement, and fellowship and support of false teaching. We can invite them in to study with them, obviously, yes, but that's not forbidden. Jesus went into the home of sinners and taught, although he was criticized. The motivation to comply with this prohibition is very powerful. And that is the last line, and in verse 11, for he that gives him greeting partakes of his evil work. You want to partake of the evil of someone else? I didn't do it, but you are partaking of it, and therefore God looks upon you with guilt. Well, what do I have to do that? Invite someone or greet someone who is a false teacher as if we agree or embrace them. So no faithful Christian desires to become complicit. You don't, I don't. We don't want anything whatsoever to do with evil works. We can't. It will blemish our soul. But John is dealing specifically with something for this elect lady and her children that he loves and wants them to go to heaven. So this is our final warning. Avoid partaking of the evil of others. However it may happen, you do not want to partake of the evil that someone else is guilty of. You don't want it to be on your record. And so when we look at these warnings, look at them together, we can see how they fit in and flow. As you read 2 John in the future, read the admonition, and then read what John said to encourage her, to encourage you in the form of warnings, to make sure that we follow the truth. Having many things to write unto you, I would not write them with paper and ink. In other words, 2 John would have been much longer. But I hope to come unto you and to speak face to face, that your joy may be made full. Those are words that sound just like John 15, of why Jesus left his teaching. The children of your elect sister salute you. You think about that meaning. It's not a salutation from her sister. It's a salutation from her sister's children. And so that would suggest to us the absence, perhaps even the death of this sister of the elect lady. But we have to leave that there. These are things that a good inquiring mind can study and learn a lot about. But the important thing is to learn them, make application in mind and heart to our own lives. For the time being, John didn't think it expedient to write all of this. Perhaps it was because of his location, because of his limitations. He desires to communicate these things in person, that her joy may be made full. In other words, let's summarize. Continue in obedience. Say this gospel sermon to this church, to the commandment that we have had from the beginning. I mean, from the very beginning. Love one another. To keep what we have in Christ and what we have achieved at this point in our life, wherever it may be. Heed the warnings about dangers that can come and take it all away. We do not want that to happen to any of us. And I trust that we work together, pray together, worship together, and support one another, that we may be strengthened in going to heaven. As we sing this invitation song this morning, there may be someone present that does not yet have this reward at all, is not yet a Christian. That's the reward of being a Christian, is being able to go to heaven. And so it's the opportunity, if you have studied the truth, you've learned the truth, but realize you have not yet obeyed the truth, then this is your opportunity through your belief and your repentance to confess and be baptized into Christ for the remission of your sins. Let us know if we can be of help to you in any way today.